It was a night like no other. The atmosphere was filled with excitement and anticipation. The audience waited anxiously, knowing that Amy Winehouse, the iconic jazz and soul diva, was about to take the stage. With her striking outfits and unique style, Amy was a star who always delivered more than expected. The audience, already accustomed to her intense energy, prepared for another memorable performance. The sound of the roaring crowd and the bright lights on the stage created a perfect backdrop for the show that was about to unfold. But what no one knew was that something extraordinary was about to completely change the course of that night. What was supposed to be just another show would actually be a milestone, a powerful message that would reverberate far beyond the theater walls. Amy, with her unique authenticity, had something much more important to offer at that moment than just her music. Her attitude would transcend the confines of the stage and reach the hearts of every person present that night. Amy was about to do something no one could have ever imagined. While the audience expected only a performance in her signature style, she would surprise everyone with a gesture of humanity and inclusion that would speak louder than any song. She wasn't just there to entertain, but to send a message that would change the way everyone saw her and the way they saw those around her. This would be no ordinary night. As the music began to echo through the room and the euphoric atmosphere took over, no one could have predicted what was about to happen. Amy, as always, was immersed in her performance, but her eyes roamed the audience, capturing a presence that irrevocably captured her attention. And then, at the height of the show, Amy did the unthinkable. She looked out at the audience, smiled, and without hesitation, pointed to a young woman in a wheelchair in the crowd. The audience's reaction was immediate, yet at the same time filled with uncertainty. At first, no one quite understood what was happening. The music seemed to fade for a moment, as if the universe had fallen silent to make room for something much bigger than a simple concert. The moment was building, and with each passing second, the tension grew. What would Amy do next? What message was she about to send to everyone? Amy's gaze never left the young woman in a wheelchair in the audience. Pointing at her wasn't just a spontaneous reaction to the moment. It was a conscious decision, a movement that spoke of inclusion and making room for those often left on the margins. As the young woman looked at Amy, it seemed as if time had stopped. She couldn't believe her eyes. Could it be that the iconic singer had singled her out from the crowd to be part of the show? The audience also didn't know how to react. Some were confused, others were starting to applaud, unsure of what was happening. The energy in the room completely changed. People were no longer just watching a show, they were witnessing something much bigger than the music. Amy's gesture was about to break down invisible barriers and pave the way for a unique experience. Meanwhile, the young woman in a wheelchair visibly moved, hesitated. She never imagined being called to the stage. After all, for her, going to a show always meant observing, away from the spotlight. She was a spectator, not a participant. But that simple and direct invitation carried immense weight. Amy wasn't just inviting a fan onto the stage. She was giving voice to an invisible audience, one that often finds no space in mainstream entertainment narratives. With teary eyes, the young woman finally stood up, supported by her friends, and began approaching the stage. The audience was still silent, but there was something magical in the air. The stage lights seemed to shine brighter, illuminating the young woman's path as she walked toward the unexpected. The act of stepping onto the stage was not only physical, but symbolized a transition in status, from spectator to protagonist. When she finally arrived on stage, what happened was even more surprising. Amy rose from her chair, applauded, and hugged her as if they had known each other for years. There was no division between the two, a pop diva and a disabled fan. In that moment, they were on the same level, sharing something far more meaningful than any song could express. The stage was no longer just a place for performance, but a place of humanity and connection. The young woman, now the center of attention, seemed dazzled, as if she were floating. What happened next was something no one in the audience would ever forget. Amy didn't just ask the young woman to be there as a mere spectator. She invited her to be part of the magic, to be part of her message. As the young woman stood beside her, Amy began to sing. But the performance wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone present, and in particular about the young woman and her story. Amy, with her characteristic style, began to sing a song that perfectly resonated with that moment. It wasn't just any song. It was a melody that spoke of struggle, overcoming, and acceptance. Each verse seemed to have been chosen by chance, but in reality, it was a reflection of what was happening at that very moment. The breaking down of barriers, inclusion, and equality for all, regardless of their differences. The audience, which had initially been stunned, was now on its feet, applauding warmly. There was a different energy in the air. Amy's words, which until then had seemed like mere lip service, were now filled with meaning. Every note she sang was a reminder that art can be a powerful tool for transformation, that it has the power to unite people and convey messages of hope and empathy. The young woman, her eyes still shining with emotion, looked at Amy and felt her world changing. She wasn't just there to watch, but to be seen, recognized, and most importantly, to feel part of something much bigger. And on that stage, with Amy, she wasn't limited by her wheelchair. She was complete, equal to everyone around her, deserving of the same attention and respect. Amy, in a spontaneous and genuine moment, took the young woman by the hand and led her to sing a snippet of the song. It wasn't just a performance, it was an exchange of energy, affection, and recognition. There was no distance between the singer and the fan, and this deeply touched everyone present. The barriers of celebrity and audience dissolved for an instant, creating a moment of pure humanity. The audience's reaction was immediate, yet nuanced. Initially, the applause began timidly, as if people were processing what they had just witnessed. A genuine surprise spread through the audience. What had just happened? It was a simple gesture, but with a profound impact. Soon, the surprise turned into a wave of applause, and the sound from the audience became deafening. This was no longer just an Amy Winehouse performance. It was a historic moment, one that would make people rethink how they viewed inclusion in entertainment. The audience, made up of a diverse group of people of different ages and backgrounds, found themselves touched by something deeper than the music. They weren't just applauding Amy's performance, but the message she was conveying. That simple, genuine gesture was a reminder of the power of art to break down social, physical, and emotional barriers. What began as a night of music and fun now became a lesson in humanity, where everyone, regardless of their differences, could see themselves reflected in those words and actions. Meanwhile, on stage, the young woman in a wheelchair still looked shocked, but now a smile lit up her face. She never imagined a moment like that was possible. She felt seen, recognized, and above all included in something that seemed reserved only for those without physical limitations. Amy had created a space where there were no exclusions, where everyone was equally important. And in that moment, the young woman understood the power of inclusion, acceptance, and respect for differences. For the audience, it wasn't just a concert by an international star. It was a reminder of what art can do. Music has the power to unite people, to give voice to those who are often silent. Amy Winehouse's gesture wasn't just a spontaneous act, but a declaration that the true beauty of human beings lies in the ability to accept and love others, regardless of differences. The audience applauded not only Amy's talent, but also the generosity of spirit she demonstrated in that moment. The young woman in a wheelchair, who had previously watched others as a distant spectator, was now the center of attention. Feeling completely part of her, that night would change her life forever. And more importantly, Amy's gesture would resonate long after the show, sparking reflections on how much still needed to be done to ensure that everyone, without exception, had the same rights and opportunities. What seemed like a simple gesture of kindness transformed into a powerful message of equality and inclusion, something that transcended the stage and reached the hearts of everyone present. Those few hours of performance became a moment that would define Amy Winehouse's legacy in a unique way. Her music has always been a combination of raw talent and genuine emotion, but in that moment, she showed that her true greatness lay in her heart. She wasn't just an artist who stirred the audience's emotions, but someone who used her platform to generate social impact in unexpected ways. After the show, social media began to fill with comments and posts, with fans and attendees sharing their experiences and feelings. The story of the young woman who took the stage with Amy spread quickly, and the impact was immense. People were touched not only by the music, but also by the profound meaning of the gesture. The response sparked discussions about inclusion, accessibility, and the role of artists in building a more just and egalitarian society. Amy never tried to make this a grand announcement or a calculated gesture. Her authenticity was what impressed me most. She did what she did because she believed that social and physical barriers shouldn't stop anyone from living their passions and dreams. With her irreverent spirit, she steered clear of the idea of a perfect show and made her performance deeply human. The spontaneous interaction with that young woman on stage was the true essence of her message. It wasn't just about being a famous singer. It was about being a voice for those who often don't have a voice. The impact of this gesture wasn't limited to the audience. In that moment, Amy Winehouse delivered a powerful message that art, music, and entertainment shouldn't be seen as something just for a select few, but as a platform to reach and transform everyone. She managed to do what many artists attempt, but few truly achieve. She brought people together in a genuine and meaningful way, breaking down the barriers between stage and audience. Over the years, the memory of that moment has remained vivid, reverberating in conversations about accessibility and inclusion in the arts. What Amy did was more than just an act of kindness. It was an invitation to deeply reflect on society's role in welcoming all individuals, regardless of their physical or social limitations. She proved that sometimes the simplest gestures can have the power to change not just one night, but an entire generation. Amy Winehouse's gesture undoubtedly transcended that show. The impact of that moment was felt long after the event. In discussions about accessibility and inclusion, the image of Amy calling the young woman to the stage became a symbol of how artists can, with simple actions, create spaces of visibility and respect for those often rendered invisible by society. In several subsequent interviews, Amy spoke about her philosophy on life and career. She always championed authenticity and genuine expression, and the moment she called the young woman in a wheelchair onto the stage was a clear representation of everything she believed in. It wasn't just about making music or being recognized for her talent, but about using her visibility to make a difference in the world. That simple gesture had lasting effects on the music industry and the way artists began to view themselves in relation to their audiences. Many began to reflect on the importance of being more inclusive, giving more voice to marginalized people, and breaking down barriers that, until then, seemed insurmountable. Artists across genres began to consider how their performances could be more accessible and representative of society as a whole. Music, suddenly, no longer felt like a limited space, but a place where everyone could feel at ease. Amy's impact was also visible in the reactions of the disability community itself. Disability support organizations and activists began to use her gesture as an example of how art can be a tool for social transformation. Most importantly, it was the realization that inclusion shouldn't be an isolated act or a one-off moment, but something that must be constantly integrated into our daily actions. Amy Winehouse's stage wasn't just a performance space. It became a stage of representation where everyone was invited to take their place. And although Amy's career has been marked by ups and downs, her message of inclusion and acceptance has never wavered. The young woman who took the stage with her, who never imagined she would have a chance to be seen, became an advocate for accessibility and equal opportunities. She, like many others, understood the power of being seen and heard, and the impact of that gesture has never faded. After that event, the music industry was forced to re-evaluate its practices. Concerts and performances began to be designed more inclusively, with accessibility becoming a priority. Artists, producers, and event organizers began to reflect on how to make their performances more welcoming to all audiences. Amy Winehouse's seemingly small and simple gesture demonstrated that with the right attitude, it is possible to transform an entertainment venue into a place of respect and equality. Music has always had the power to bring people together, but in that moment, Amy proved that it could be used to create real dialogue about social issues that often go ignored. She not only used her voice to sing, but also to speak for those who otherwise didn't have the opportunity to be heard. And the message was clear. Inclusion is not a favor, but a right. And the doors of the stage, like the doors of society, should be open to all. So when you remember Amy Winehouse, you don't just remember her powerful voice or her turbulent career. You also remember her ability to use her stage to send a message of transformation. In one night, she didn't just make music, she made history, showing the world that artists have the power to change people's lives and pave the way for a more inclusive and just future. What happened that night with Amy Winehouse and the young woman in a wheelchair wasn't just an isolated incident, but the beginning of a larger movement that reverberated throughout the years. The music industry and the arts world as a whole began to see with new eyes the importance of making their platforms more accessible and inclusive. This moment became an example of how the empowerment of marginalized people can happen naturally and without complicated requirements. Amy wasn't obligated to do what she did, but she chose to do it because she believed in something bigger. She understood that her voice could be used for more than just entertainment. She knew that by taking an inclusive stance, she was also bringing a message of hope to those who felt excluded. Amy's stage wasn't just a space for the biggest names in music, but for anyone who wanted a chance to shine. After the event, the story of the young woman who was called to the stage circulated quickly, inspiring many others in similar situations to believe they, too, deserved a place in the spotlight. And while Amy had been a polarizing figure for many, her gesture was universal. There were no political or social divisions there. What existed was recognition of humanity, with its vulnerabilities and achievements, and the confirmation that everyone has something to offer the world. Furthermore, social media became fertile ground for spreading this message. Fans from all over the world began sharing the story, not just about Amy's performance, but about the power of being included, valued, and most importantly, being heard. The young woman who took the stage with Amy became a symbol of resilience and perseverance, and indirectly, the singer helped set a new standard for inclusion in the arts. In fact, Amy's legacy wasn't limited to music or the entertainment industry, but extended to society as a whole. She succeeded in creating a shift in how people viewed disability, no longer as a limitation, but as an integral part of human diversity. that deserves to be celebrated. Her simple yet courageous attitude forever changed the way we view true inclusion. Over time, the impact of that gesture only grew. Organizations and social movements began using the story of Amy and the young woman in a wheelchair as a starting point for campaigns and projects promoting inclusion in the world of arts and culture. Amy Winehouse's event was, in a way, a milestone in breaking down prejudices, giving others the opportunity to feel part of something bigger, to be part of the world of art, music, and entertainment. Furthermore, many artists, now inspired by Amy, began incorporating accessibility into their productions and performances. It was no longer enough for the music to be good or the performance to be excellent. Now, inclusion was the new criterion for success. This not only transformed the artistic landscape, but also helped create a more empathetic and welcoming society. Amy not only shone a light on disability, but also on the importance of using our platforms and visibility to foster real social change. And what once seemed like a simple interaction on stage became a transformative movement, a reminder that everyone, regardless of their limitations, has the right to shine. The moment Amy Winehouse called a wheelchair user onto the stage will never be forgotten, and her story will continue to be told not only by music fans, but by all who believe in a more just and egalitarian world. With a simple gesture, she managed to touch people's souls and create an echo that still resonates, demonstrating that the true greatness of an artist lies not only in their music, but also in their ability to inspire and bring about real change. In the world, Amy Winehouse, with her unique voice and indomitable spirit, will never be remembered solely as a jazz and soul star. She will be remembered as an artist who used her stage to promote a higher ideal, to convey a message that transcended the limits of music, and to teach us that deep down, everyone has the right to be seen and heard. And with this gesture, Amy didn't just change one night of performance, she changed the outlook of an entire generation. What Amy Winehouse did on that stage was a powerful reminder that simple gestures can have a transformative impact. Often, great social change begins with small actions, with moments of empathy that at first glance may seem simple or spontaneous, but which have the power to challenge established norms and inspire a revolution in collective behavior. In Amy's case, her choice to give a young woman with a disability a space on stage wasn't just a momentary gesture of kindness, but a clear affirmation that everyone has intrinsic value that deserves to be recognized and celebrated. That simple interaction, in a setting where difference is often marginalized, was the starting point for a deeper conversation about how society treats people with disabilities and how the arts can be a channel for changing these perceptions. Amy, at her core, challenged the idea that perfection or popularity should define a person's worth. By giving the young woman the chance to stand out and shine, she reaffirmed a fundamental belief: no one should be left behind. The stage, at that moment, was not just the place for the star, but for everyone who identified with the desire to be heard and respected. This event also brought to light a reflection on how often prominent spaces in society are structured to exclude. When someone like Amy, with her enormous visibility, uses her influence to open doors for those who are normally ignored, she not only transforms an event, but creates a new standard. She demonstrated that true change begins with the willingness to look at others, at those outside society's spotlight, and to do something about it. Amy's gesture became a model for other entertainment personalities, as well as for organizations and producers in the sector. More and more artists began to question how they could use their platforms to support social causes and promote inclusion. Stories of musicians and artists following Amy's example began to emerge, creating a virtuous cycle that continued to grow, increasingly encouraging participation from everyone without distinction. The moment Amy invited the young woman onto the stage also resonated in many areas beyond music. It was a reminder that society often has a habit of silencing certain voices. The voices of people with disabilities, minorities, and marginalized communities. However, by recognizing and amplifying these voices, as Amy did with that simple gesture, we can create space for stories that until then were hidden in the shadows of mainstream narratives. Art, by its nature, has always been a vehicle for expression and a way to communicate the deepest realities of society. Amy's gesture demonstrated that art should not be limited to entertainment, but should also be a reflection of human diversity. Every story has its value, every person has their voice, and inclusion should be the rule, not the exception. Amy used the stage not only to express herself, but to offer others the opportunity to be heard and celebrated. The visibility afforded to the young woman in a wheelchair not only illuminated her life in an unexpected way, but also inspired a generation to question how they could contribute to creating a more inclusive society. This gesture became a symbol of resistance to exclusion and a celebration of diversity. It reminded us that everyone has something unique to offer, and that prominent spaces should reflect this. Amy Winehouse, with her authenticity and courage, did something many artists would never have the courage to do. She used her space for something bigger than herself. By inviting a young woman in a wheelchair onto the stage, she not only provided an unforgettable experience for that person, but also opened a dialogue about inclusion, respect, and empathy that transcended the boundaries of music and extended to society at large. Today, as the music industry and the arts world continue to evolve, Amy's legacy lives on. Her message that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated remains more relevant than ever. Art has the power to transform, unite, and provoke reflection. Amy's gesture was not just a moment of spontaneity, but a milestone in the transformation of how society addresses differences and inclusion. Amy Winehouse was, and will continue to be, remembered not only for her unique voice, but also for the impact she made by challenging social norms and giving voice to those who are often silenced. She became an example of how true greatness lies not in being the biggest star in the world, but in using that star to light the way for others.